They called the forest cabin cursed. Everyone who entered it came out changed. But a former Navy SEAL went anyway. Not for legends, but because his dog was growing weaker, and the city noise was breaking him. He came for silence, but silence uncovered something buried. A storm hit. A girl lay in the snow, and unfamiliar footprints stopped just outside his door. This isn't just survival, it's loyalty, faith, and the moment he realized God may have led him exactly where he needed to stand. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so we can reach 1,000 followers. Every follow gives us the strength to create more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. The fireworks began before the sky was fully dark. Rowan Hale had learned to recognize the difference between celebration and detonation by sound alone. Celebration had rhythm, a burst and a bloom, a cheer that followed. Detonation had pressure in it, an abrupt shove of air that made the ribs tighten before the mind caught up. From the balcony of his third-floor apartment, the city stretched out in restless lines of sodium light and brake lamps. It was late summer, humid, the air thick with smoke from backyard grills and something sweeter cheap sparklers burning down to wire. Somewhere below, a group of college kids shouted in sloppy unison. Rowan stood motionless, forearms resting on the metal railing. At 35, he was built the way disciplined men are built, lean and compact. No excess, no show. Around 6 foot tall, yet with squared shoulders that held a quiet steadiness rather than bulk. His face was clean-shaven, razor close. The absence of a beard made the structure beneath unmistakable. A firm jawline, defined cheekbones, the kind of face that had been carved by habit and held there by will. His hair, dark brown and cut short in a military style, had grown slightly longer than regulation allowed, brushing the top of his forehead when the wind caught it. His skin was fair but weathered, carrying the faint roughness of cold climates and long hours outdoors. His eyes gray-blue and steady rested on the skyline without judgment. They were the eyes of a man who had seen chaos and no longer flinched at it. Except tonight. Behind him, inside the apartment, something shifted sharply against tile. The first real blast hit a thunderclap from somewhere too close. Not the distant bloom of a sanctioned show, as this one cracked between buildings and ricocheted up the narrow canyon of the street. Rowan did not turn immediately. He felt it first, the tension in the air. Then the sound that followed. Claws scrambling, breath snapping short. "Coda," he said quietly. He stepped inside. The living room lights were dim. The television, muted, flickered with some forgettable late-night program. On the far side of the room, pressed against the bathtub in the open bathroom doorway, was a German shepherd the size of a small wolf. Coda was 6 years old. His coat carried a layered blend of cream, gray, and black, sable tones that caught light in subtle gradients. In daylight, he looked almost noble. In this artificial glare, he looked smaller somehow, compressed by fear. His amber eyes were wide, whites visible, ears pinned halfway back, breath rapid, shallow. The harness still rested across his shoulders, black, with a dark red trim that caught light faintly at the seams. It fit him securely, built for work, not decoration. Was another explosion cracked overhead. Coda flinched hard enough to knock the wastebasket sideways. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He folded in on himself, and tried to disappear against porcelain and tile. Rowan crouched slowly. "I know," he said. "I know." He didn't touch him yet. He had learned not to rush contact during a spike. 8 weeks of training sessions with Noah Reyes had drilled that into him. Noah had been a K9 trainer once, early 30s, medium height with a runner's build and black hair cropped short. He had a habit of folding his arms when he listened, revealing forearms scarred lightly from leashes and wire fences. His smile came easily, but there was a firmness underneath it, someone who'd been bitten and stayed anyway. "It's not weakness," Noah had told him in the training room, while Coda trembled through recorded city sounds at low volume. "It's conditioning. Something paired loud urban noise with danger. We untangle it slowly." Doctor. Eliza Hart had said the same thing in softer words, late 30s, hazel eyes behind thin-framed glasses, hair pulled into a neat bun. She carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that came from translating fear into clinical language for a living. "Noise phobia can escalate," she had explained, pen tapping lightly against her clipboard. "Especially in environments you can't control. Fireworks are unpredictable. Echoes amplify in city corridors. It's not that he's failing, it's that he's overwhelmed." Rowan had nodded then, jaw tight. Now he reached out. His palm rested against the side of Coda's neck, firm but steady. He matched his breathing to the dog's, long inhales through the nose, slow exhales through parted lips. Outside, laughter. Another blast. Coda's body shuddered. Rowan's mind did something it hadn't done in years. It flashed, not to gunfire, as not to sand or ocean, but to a moment during a training exercise overseas when a misfire had sent a younger teammate scrambling behind cover, panic bright in his eyes. Rowan had put a hand on that man's shoulder too. "You're here," he'd said. "You're not there." He said it again now. "You're here." Coda's breath hitched. The city did not care. Another explosion detonated so close that the apartment windows rattled violently. Coda did something he had never done before. He did not retreat further. He lunged toward the door, not in aggression, not to attack, to flee. The leash hook clattered against the wall as he pulled for the exit, eyes fixed on the hallway, as if distance alone could silence the sky. For a split second, Rowan froze, not because of the dog's panic, but because of what it meant. 8 weeks of work, progress measured in inches, and one night had undone it all. He caught the harness handle just before Coda could slam himself into the door. Easy, but the word sounded thinner than it used to. Something inside Rowan shifted in that moment. Not frustration, not anger. Recognition. As the city was winning, and the city didn't even know it was fighting. He secured the leash and guided Coda into the bedroom, the smallest interior room in the apartment. Curtains drawn. White noise machine turned on. Lights dimmed. The blasts continued, but muffled. Rowan sat on the floor with his back against the bed. Tactical combat shirt still on his frame. Olive green faded from wash and time, fabric softened at the cuffs. The thermal layer beneath, dark red, peaked at the collar. His combat pants bore the wear of years, knees scuffed, pocket seams relaxed from use. He didn't change clothes for evenings. Old habits lingered. Coda pressed close, trembling, gradually easing into a tight curl against Rowan's thigh. Rowan stared at the closed door. He had done everything correctly. Structured desensitization. Controlled exposure. Reward timing. Environmental management. But you couldn't control an entire city. You couldn't negotiate with people who thought sound was celebration. He thought of the lease renewal email sitting unopened in his inbox. He thought of the way Coda had reacted last week when a garbage truck backfired. He thought of the simple, clinical truth Eliza had given him. Recovery requires a stable baseline. Stable. He almost laughed. The baseline here was sirens at 2 a.m. and subwoofers vibrating drywall. When the fireworks finally slowed, the silence felt artificial-like, the pause after a storm that would inevitably circle back. Coda's breathing steadied. Rowan looked down at him. "You don't belong here," he murmured. It wasn't an accusation. It was a confession. He had told himself they were staying because stability mattered, because running felt like failure. But maybe staying was the real form of denial. He reached for his phone, scrolled. The listing had been open for weeks. A small cabin available under a Forest Service lease program in northern Minnesota, with limited utilities, remote access road, winters severe, quiet. He zoomed in on the map. Lakes, pines, long stretches of nothing. He imagined the air there, clean, dry, cold. Sound swallowed by snow instead of amplified by concrete. Coda shifted slightly, lifting his head. Amber eyes searched Rowan's face, not questioning, just present. Rowan rested his hand between the dog's ears. "I can't promise easy," he said softly, "but I can promise quiet." He closed the lease renewal email without opening it, opened a new tab, Forest Service Application Portal. The hum of the city persisted faintly through walls and insulation. Rowan filled out the form methodically. Name. Prior service. Background check authorization. He didn't hesitate. When he reached the final confirmation page, he paused, not because he doubted the decision, but because he understood its weight. Leaving meant letting go of proximity to hospitals, to grocery stores, to convenience. And leaving meant admitting that the environment he'd chosen wasn't working. He clicked submit. The confirmation email arrived almost immediately. Coda's head dropped back onto Rowan's leg. Outside, one last distant firework bloomed, faint, harmless. This time, Coda did not flinch. Rowan leaned his head back against the bed frame and closed his eyes. He was not running. He was repositioning. And for the first time in months, the decision felt aligned rather than reactive. The noise would not end, but they would not stay to hear it. The drive north took 8 hours, but the silence began long before the city disappeared from the rear-view mirror. Rowan Hale kept both hands steady on the steering wheel, posture upright even in the driver's seat. He wore the same faded olive tactical combat shirt, the fabric softened by years of washing and cold weather. The dark red thermal layer beneath showed faintly at the collar. His combat pants creased naturally at the knees where the fabric had worn thin over time. The boots, old military work boots, rested firmly on the pedals, movements efficient, controlled. In the passenger seat, Coda lay curled but alert. The German shepherd's coat caught the changing light as they left suburban gray behind. Cream along the chest. Ash gray blending into black saddle markings along his back. His amber eyes no longer wide with panic, but watchful. Every time a truck roared past, his ears flicked, but he did not collapse inward. Rowan noticed. He didn't say anything. He had learned not to praise prematurely. Stability was built in quiet layers. By late afternoon, the highway narrowed. Traffic thinned into occasional pickups and logging trucks. The air grew clearer, cooler. Pines replaced billboards. The sky expanded. When they crossed into northern Minnesota, the world seemed to exhale. Snow still clung in stubborn patches beneath tree lines despite the advancing season. Lakes flashed silver between branches. Rowan rolled the window down slightly. The air smelled like cold water and resin. Coda lifted his head and drew in a long breath. No trembling. No frantic scanning. Just scent. Rowan felt something uncoil in his chest that he had not known was still wound tight. They reached the ranger station just before dusk. The building was modest wood siding, forest green trim, on a flag moving gently in the wind. A government sign marked it clearly as U.S. Forest Service property. Practical, unadorned. A man stepped out onto the wooden porch as Rowan parked. Ranger Mason Crow stood with a posture that spoke of long winters and patient work. Early 40s, broad-shouldered, without heaviness. His face was angular but open, light stubble framing a firm jaw. His hair was a muted blonde, trimmed short beneath a dark knit cap. The kind of man who had grown up in cold places and stayed there by choice. He walked down the steps with steady strides. "You Rowan Hale?" he asked. His voice carried an easy baritone, not overly friendly, but not guarded either. "That's me," Rowan replied. Mason's eyes flicked to Coda as Rowan opened the passenger door. The dog stepped out slowly, harness black with a deep red trim catching the fading light. He stretched, shook once, then paused, nose lifting into the northern air. Mason watched that closely. "Shepherd?" he asked. "Yeah, looks steady. He is." Mason nodded once, accepting that answer without probing further. The ranger uniform fit him comfortably. Forest green jacket with an embroidered patch at the shoulder, utility belt with radio clipped at the hip, tan cargo trousers tucked into insulated boots. "You've got the lease paperwork," Mason said, pulling a folder from under his arm. "Cabin's about 4 miles up an access road. Plowed in winter, but not daily. Generator's manual. Water's from a well pump's been serviced." Rowan listened carefully, absorbing details the way he once absorbed mission briefings. "No surprises?" Rowan asked. Mason's mouth twitched slightly. "Up here? Weather's the only one that doesn't give warning." He handed over the permit. Everything was legitimate, signed, sealed. "Your former military," Mason added casually, noticing the bearing rather than asking outright. "Yes. Cabin used to be a fire lookout. I decommissioned 15 years ago. Some folks couldn't handle the isolation." Rowan glanced at Coda. "We're not here for company." Mason studied him for a second longer. Not judging. Assessing. "You'll find plenty of quiet." They drove the final stretch just as the sun dipped below the tree line. The access road was narrow, flanked by tall pines that leaned inward like sentries. Snow remained in shaded patches, crunching faintly beneath the tires. When the cabin came into view, it stood elevated slightly above a small, clearing weathered wood siding faded to gray, metal roof dull but intact. A wraparound porch. A lookout platform accessible by a narrow external staircase. It was not picturesque. It was functional. Rowan parked and cut the engine. The silence was immediate. No distant sirens, no engines, no subwoofer vibrations bleeding through walls, just wind moving through trees. Coda stepped out slowly. He stood still for nearly 10 seconds. Rowan didn't move. The dog's ears rotated. Forward, side, back. Processing, a branch cracked somewhere deeper in the woods. Coda turned his head, but his body remained relaxed. Then he took 3 deliberate steps forward and began sniffing along the edge of the clearing. No retreat. No crouching. Rowan exhaled quietly. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of old wood and dust. Not decay, just disuse. The air was cool, dry. Rowan moved room to room methodically, checking window seals, testing door hinges, scanning corners. Habits did not vanish just because the uniform did. Coda followed at heel, occasionally veering to investigate a scent beneath the kitchen counter or near the base of the stairs. The interior was simple. 1 main room with a cast-iron stove, a small kitchen space, a narrow bedroom, and a ladder leading to the lookout platform above. Rowan set down their bags and stepped back outside. The sky had deepened into indigo. Stars emerged one by one, and he hadn't seen this many in years. Coda froze, not with fear, with focus. He stood near the edge of the clearing, head angled toward the eastern tree line. His body lowered slightly, not defensive, not aggressive alert. Rowan followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Then a flicker, a faint, brief glint of light far between the trunks. Not fire, not reflection from the cabin. Something metallic catching the last thread of dusk. It vanished almost immediately. Coda did not bark. He did not move. He simply watched. Rowan felt a familiar, controlled tightening in his spine. Not danger. Not yet. But awareness. He took 1 slow step forward. The woods returned to stillness. Coda eventually relaxed, tail lowering naturally. Whatever it had been, if it had been anything, was gone. Rowan did not chase it. He had come for quiet. He would not hunt shadows on the first night. So he turned instead to the porch steps and began unloading supplies. The work grounded him. Generator fuel stored properly. Flashlights placed near doorways. Camera mounted discreetly facing the access road, legal, visible, deterrent rather than trap. Coda settled near the porch railing, watching Rowan move. As darkness deepened, the cold sharpened. Rowan lit the stove carefully, feeding small pieces of dry wood first. The crackle sounded natural, predictable. Coda lay down near the warmth, paws crossed, eyes open, but calm. Rowan removed his boots and flexed his toes. His knee twinged, faintly old strain from years back, manageable, but persistent. He leaned back against the cabin wall. Silence settled again. Not empty, layered. Wind brushing pine needles. Distant owl call. Snow shifting from a branch. Coda's breathing slow and steady. Rowan realized something then. His own shoulders had lowered. He had not noticed how high they'd been. The city had required vigilance against noise. Here, what vigilance had a different texture. Coda rolled slightly onto one side, exposing his chest to the warmth. That simple gesture unguarded felt like proof of concept. Rowan looked up toward the dark outline of the lookout platform. Isolation had driven others away, Mason had said. But isolation wasn't always absence. Sometimes it was space. Space for fear to thin out. Space for breathing to return to baseline. He thought briefly of Noah and Eliza. He would update them once they settled. This wasn't a cure. It was environment. Environment mattered. The wind rose slightly, sweeping across the clearing. Pine branches whispered. Coda lifted his head once more toward the eastern tree line. Rowan followed the motion. Nothing moved. No light. Just trees standing like patient witnesses. Rowan let his gaze linger there a moment longer than necessary. Then he stood, stepped inside, and closed the cabin door. He locked it, not out of fear, but out of habit, and the latch clicked softly into place. Inside, warmth gathered slowly. Coda circled twice and settled near the stove. Rowan turned off the overhead light and let the fire provide illumination. The shadows it cast were natural, shaped by flame, not by street lamps bleeding through blinds. He lay back on the narrow couch, hands folded loosely over his chest. Coda's breathing remained even. Outside, the forest kept its own counsel. For the first time in months, Rowan did not wait for an explosion. He waited for morning. Morning arrived clean and unhurried. Rowan woke before the light fully breached the eastern tree line. Habit, not alarm, pulled him upright. For a moment he lay still on the narrow couch, listening. No sirens, no distant engines, just wind sliding through pine needles and the faint metallic tick of the cooling stove. Coda was already awake. The German shepherd sat near the front door, posture upright but relaxed, amber eyes tracking the shifting light beneath the frame. His cream and gray coat caught the soft dawn glow, the black saddle along his back, dark against the pale floorboards. The black harness with deep red trim remained clipped on. Rowan had left it that way overnight, part readiness, part reassurance. "You slept," Rowan murmured. Coda's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. His tail gave one slow sweep across the wood. That was more than anything, steadied Rowan. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The cold was sharper than the previous evening. Frost laced the porch railing in delicate filigree. The clearing stretched outward, untouched by tracks. Breath hung white in the air. Rowan scanned automatically left tree line, right tree line, road access point. Stillness. Not the uneasy kind, just the kind that existed because nothing demanded movement. Coda followed him down the steps, nose low, inhaling deeply. He moved in wide arcs along the perimeter, reading the earth in a language Rowan would never fully understand. Rowan walked the edge of the clearing, attention disciplined but unhurried. His tactical shirt shifted with his stride, fabric worn soft at the cuffs. The red thermal beneath warmed against the cold, but his skin registered the air like memory northern climates had shaped him once before. Halfway along the tree line, Coda paused. He leaned forward slightly, a muzzle hovering over a patch of frost-stiffened ground. Rowan stepped closer. There, faint but visible in the thin crust of ice, were impressions not made by wildlife. Boot prints, not fresh from the morning. The edges had softened slightly, but they were not days old either. The tread was deep, evenly spaced, deliberate. Rowan crouched. He did not touch them. He only observed. Standard winter tactical boot pattern. Heavy sole. Weight distributed evenly, no limp, no uneven stride. Someone had been here. Not stumbling, not wandering. Walking. He straightened slowly. Coda's posture did not reflect fear. His tail remained neutral. His ears angled slightly forward, processing. "Not random," Rowan said quietly. He did not feel threatened. He felt aware. The access road stretched quiet behind him. No tire tracks beyond his own from yesterday. If someone had approached, it had been on foot. Rowan walked back toward the cabin and mounted the external staircase to the old lookout platform. From above, the view widened. Pines rolled outward in waves of green and white. A small lake glinted through branches to the north. To the east, the forest thickened into shadow. He studied it carefully. If someone had stood beyond the tree line, they would have had partial line of sight to the clearing. He noted it mentally. Then he climbed down. He would not turn a single set of tracks into paranoia. He had come here to reduce noise, not create it internally. Still, after breakfast dried meat and coffee boiled on the stove, Rowan decided to drive into town. He wanted context. The ranger station was quiet when he arrived. Mason Crow stood near the truck bay, speaking to a woman in a heavy canvas jacket. She turned first. Juniper Vale. Rowan recognized the name only after Mason introduced her. "June," Mason said. "This is Rowan Hale. Took the old lookout lease." June extended a hand. She was in her mid-20s, lean and tall in a way that suggested endurance rather than fragility. Her hair, dark brown with copper hints in sunlight, was tied into a low knot that had partially loosened. Strands framed her face carelessly. Her skin was pale, but wind-reddened at the cheeks. Her eyes, deep brown, sharp and assessing, moved quickly, but not nervously. Her handshake was firm. "You're the new quiet neighbor," she said lightly. Her voice carried a journalist's cadence measured. Curious. "I prefer quiet," Rowan replied. June's gaze dropped briefly to Coda, who stood close at Rowan's side. She did not reach toward him. She assessed him first. "He looks like he reads people," she said. "He does." June nodded. She wore a forest green parka with reflective strips dulled by use. Beneath it, a thick cream sweater, dark trekking pants tucked into insulated boots. A camera hung at her hip, scuffed from travel. "June's been asking questions about the old research site east of your cabin," Mason added. Rowan glanced at Mason. The ranger's expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened slightly at the mention. "What kind of questions?" Rowan asked. June shifted her weight. "There was a Cold War-era communications facility out there," she said. "Officially decommissioned. Unofficially, there's some irregularity in land records tied to that parcel." She spoke carefully, as if editing herself even in conversation. "I've been tracing property adjustments that shouldn't exist," she continued. "Sections of forest designated as federal that appear to have shifted in private filings." Rowan listened. He did not show reaction. Mason folded his arms. "June's a freelancer," he said. "She's been digging into county records for weeks." June offered a faint smile. "Freelancer," she repeated. "Which means I don't have a newsroom backing me if I step wrong." Coda moved slightly, positioning himself between Rowan and the open road, gaze fixed outward. Rowan felt it too, a subtle change in air. Not danger, just motion. A pickup truck rolled slowly past the station, windows tinted dark. Rowan's eyes tracked the vehicle without turning his head fully. It did not slow. It did not accelerate. It simply passed. June watched it too. "Local?" Rowan asked Mason. Mason shrugged lightly. "Plenty of locals drive trucks." But his eyes followed the road longer than necessary. As the truck disappeared from sight, Coda did something unusual. He stepped forward, not toward Rowan, not toward Mason, but toward June. He inhaled once, deeply. Then he lowered his head slightly and gave a soft, almost inaudible rumble. Not a warning, not fear, recognition. June stiffened for half a second, not backing away, not flinching, just still. Her gaze met the dog's. For a suspended moment, something unspoken passed between them. Coda's posture shifted subtly. The tension left his spine. And he stepped back to Rowan's side. June exhaled slowly. "That's new," Mason murmured. Rowan studied June carefully. Coda rarely engaged first. "Not like that." Dogs know who's carrying weight, June said quietly. It wasn't a joke. Rowan held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded once. Whatever Coda had sensed, it had not been threat. It had been something else. The conversation resumed, but the air had changed. June explained the inconsistencies in land parcels near the old site plots that appeared to shift boundaries in digital filings compared to archived maps. Someone's rewriting geography on paper, she said. Mason frowned. That's county business. It becomes federal business if it affects protected land, June replied evenly. Rowan remained silent. He had come for quiet. Yet here was motion, moving toward him regardless. I'm not asking you to get involved, June added, reading his posture. But your cabin sits close enough to the eastern tree line that you may notice activity. I already have, Rowan said. Both Mason and June looked at him. Boot prints, Rowan clarified. Not mine. Mason's expression hardened slightly. You sure? Yes. June's eyes sharpened. Recent? Within 24 hours. Silence settled over the group. Mason rubbed the back of his neck. I'll patrol the access routes, he said, but we're stretched thin. Budget cuts. June gave a short nod. I'll be careful. Rowan looked at Coda. The dog stood calm, gaze forward. No trembling, no urban panic, just measured presence. He felt the internal conflict stir faintly. He had promised quiet, but quiet did not mean absence of reality. Sometimes it meant seeing clearly without the distortion of noise. We'll monitor, Rowan said finally. Not volunteering, not withdrawing. Mason nodded once. June studied him as if memorizing something. You strike me as someone who doesn't chase shadows, she said. I don't, Rowan replied. Good, she said. Because this isn't one. She turned and headed toward her car, an older Subaru with roof racks and mud-splattered doors. The kind of vehicle that prioritized function over appearance. Rowan watched her go. Mason looked at him. You didn't come here for this, the ranger said quietly. No. You might not have a choice. Rowan met his gaze. I always have a choice. Mason held that for a moment, then nodded. As Rowan drove back toward the cabin, the forest felt slightly altered. Not louder, just aware. Coda rested his head against the door, eyes half-lidded but alert. Rowan's hands remained steady on the wheel. He would not escalate. He would not assume. He would observe. The clearing came into view again, unchanged from morning. Cabin steady, trees unmoved. He parked and stepped out. The air remained cold and clean. Coda moved ahead, scanning. No new tracks, no new signs. Rowan stood still for a long moment. Silence remained intact. But it was no longer empty, it held questions. He did not chase them. He stepped inside, closed the door, and let the fire catch once more. He had not come here to fight. He had come here to stabilize, and for now, that remained the mission. The town square had been strung with lights that looked fragile against the northern sky. Rowan had hesitated before driving in. He had told himself it was controlled exposure. A small winter festival. Predictable sound. Manageable crowd. Noah Reyes had once said, avoidance reinforces fear, but exposure has to be measured. Rowan repeated that to himself as he parked along Main Street. The town was small, one grocery, a hardware store, a diner with a red vinyl sign, and now banners strung between lampposts announcing the Winter Ice Social. Children skated on a temporary rink set up over packed snow. Families clustered around a portable hot cocoa stand. Music played from a speaker mounted above the courthouse steps. Soft folk music, not the deep, vibrating bass of city clubs. Coda stepped out of the truck. The cold air hit him first. He stood still, nose lifting, reading the environment. Rowan watched for the subtle signs. Ears steady, breathing normal, tail level. They walked together toward the square. Rowan's boots struck the pavement in even rhythm. His olive tactical shirt moved lightly under his insulated jacket, the red thermal beneath warming his core. His combat pants bore faint frost along the seams. The old military watch at his wrist reflected small fragments of light as he checked time out of habit. People glanced at him. He knew the look outsider. Military posture. Dog built like a working animal, not a pet. A woman near the cocoa stand smiled politely but stepped aside, giving them space. Coda moved smoothly at heel. For a moment, Rowan allowed himself to believe this might work. He crouched slightly and gave the command Noah had taught him during desensitization sessions. "Look." Coda shifted his gaze to Rowan's face. Reward. Small treat. Calm. A group of teenagers ran past, on boots crunching snow. One of them dropped a metal thermos accidentally. It clanged loudly against pavement. Coda's ears twitched, but he did not recoil. Rowan felt a cautious surge of relief. "Good," he murmured. The music continued. The crowd hummed. A man approached from the direction of the rink. Deputy Landry Shaw. Rowan recognized him from town briefings Mason had mentioned, county-level law enforcement, mid-40s, broad-shouldered but carrying weight differently than a ranger. Landry's build was more administrative than field-ready. His hair was neatly parted, brown fading slightly at the temples. He wore a dark wool coat over a collared shirt, no visible badge displayed, but the posture of someone accustomed to authority. His jaw was square, clean-shaven, lips forming a polite but measured smile. His eyes, however, carried calculation rather than warmth. "You must be Hale," Landry said. His voice was smooth, controlled. Rowan straightened. "Oh, that's right. Settling in?" "Yes." Landry's gaze drifted briefly to Coda. "Fine dog," he remarked. "Former service?" "Yes." Landry nodded once, as if ticking off a mental list. "You're near the eastern boundary, correct?" Rowan's attention sharpened slightly. "That's right." Landry gave a small, dismissive shrug. "Just making sure new tenants are aware of hunting zones and private parcels. People get turned around out there." The words were casual, but they held weight. Rowan met his gaze evenly. "I don't get turned around." Landry's smile thinned slightly. "I'm sure you don't." A child's laughter broke across the square. A dog barked near the skating rink. Coda shifted his weight subtly. Rowan felt it immediately. Not panic, not yet. Just increased awareness. Landry's eyes flicked briefly toward the courthouse building. "We like to keep things orderly here," he added. "People who come for quiet tend to appreciate that." Rowan nodded once. "I do." Landry held his gaze 1 second longer than necessary, and then stepped back. "Enjoy the festival." He turned and walked away, coat moving sharply with each step. Rowan watched him blend into the crowd. Something about the exchange lingered, not threat, not overt hostility. Territory. Rowan exhaled slowly. He knelt again beside Coda. "You're good," he murmured. Coda's breathing remained steady. A group gathered near the rink as a local high school band prepared to perform a short set. Rowan hadn't seen that in the event listing. He scanned the setup. Portable speakers, Microphones. Amplifier. Small, manageable. He hesitated. Exposure had to be gradual. He could leave now. But if he left at every possibility, Coda would never recalibrate. He stayed. The first chord struck. It was louder than expected. Not deafening, but sharp. The sound bounced off the courthouse brick and echoed across the open square. Coda flinched. Rowan's hand went immediately to the harness handle, not restraining, just anchoring. "It's okay," he said calmly. Second chord. Drum. Snare crack. The acoustic space amplified the percussion more than Rowan had anticipated. Coda's breathing shortened. Rowan shifted slightly to block one side of the sound. "Look!" Coda glanced up. Reward. But the third drumbeat hit harder. A child nearby screamed playfully. Somewhere behind them, a firecracker small, unsanctioned popped sharply against pavement. That was the fracture. Coda's entire body compressed, his head lowered, tail tucked. He did not bark. He froze. Rowan felt the shift like a wire snapping tight. "Easy," he murmured. Coda's eyes were no longer scanning environment. They were unfocused, searching for exit. He turned abruptly and pulled toward the street. Rowan moved with him instantly. Not force. Direction. They cleared the square in under 15 seconds. The music continued behind them. Rowan guided Coda down a side alley between the diner and a hardware store, away from echo. The cold air felt harsher now. Coda trembled, not violently, but deeply. Rowan crouched and brought his face level with the dog's. "I pushed too far," he said quietly. His voice carried no frustration, only recognition. He matched breathing again. Slow. Measured. Coda's amber eyes gradually refocused. The tremor softened. Rowan remained there until the dog's posture lifted naturally on its own. Not commanded. Chosen. As Rowan stood, he noticed something unexpected. Coda was not looking toward the square. He was looking past Rowan's shoulder, toward the far end of the alley. A parked SUV idled silently at the curb. Black. Windows tinted. It had not been there when they entered. The engine made almost no sound, but faint exhaust vapor curled in the cold air. Coda's ears angled forward. No panic. Just focus. The driver's side window lowered slightly. Too dark to see clearly. Then it rolled back up. The SUV pulled away smoothly. No sudden acceleration. No screeching tires. Just departure. Rowan memorized the shape of the vehicle. The slight dent near the rear bumper, the pattern of the license plate partially obscured by snow. He did not chase. He did not escalate. He simply watched until it disappeared. Coda's body gradually relaxed. The tremor in his muscles had nothing to do with drums anymore. Rowan felt it. The difference. Noise was not the only thing being tested. They returned to the truck without re-entering the square. Rowan opened the passenger door. Coda jumped in willingly this time, settling into the seat rather than scrambling for cover. Progress was not linear. Rowan understood that. He rested his forearm across the steering wheel before starting the engine. His jaw tightened slightly, not from anger, but from recalibration. He had believed the festival might serve as structured exposure. Instead, it had revealed the boundary more clearly. Controlled environment did not mean predictable environment, and the presence of the SUV added a layer he had not accounted for. He drove back toward the forest slowly. The town lights diminished behind them. Pine silhouettes returned. The quiet thickened. When they reached the cabin, dusk had settled again. Rowan stepped out and stood for a long moment in the clearing. The forest did not hum. It breathed. Coda exited the truck more confidently than he had left town. He shook once, shedding residual tension. Rowan watched him circle the perimeter of the clearing. No crouch, no tremor, just deliberate scanning. Inside the cabin, Rowan lit the stove again. The fire crackled gently. Coda lay down near the warmth, head resting between his paws. Rowan sat across from him. "I won't force it," he said softly. The promise was not about the festival. It was about control. The city had been uncontrollable. The festival had been unpredictable. The forest, though not empty of complexity, offered space to measure. Rowan removed his jacket, revealing the worn olive shirt beneath. The red thermal glowed faintly in firelight. He flexed his hands once. He would adapt the plan. No more town events for now. Desensitization would happen gradually, perhaps from distance, from within the truck, from the edge rather than the center. He glanced toward the window. The forest stood still. No headlights. No motion. Just darkness layered with stars. Coda lifted his head once more. Their eyes met. The dog's gaze was steady. Present. Rowan nodded slightly. "You're not broken," he said. The words were meant for both of them. He leaned back against the cabin wall and listened to the fire. The festival noise faded in memory. The forest remained. And for now, that was enough. The storm did not arrive with drama. It thickened gradually, like a decision forming in the sky. By late afternoon, the light over the clearing had shifted from clean winter brightness to something muted and metallic, and Rowan felt the pressure change before he saw the snow begin to fall. Years of deployments had trained him to read subtle environmental cues: wind direction, air density, the silence of birds, and now that same awareness registered in the tightening line of pine branches along the ridge. Coda sensed it first. The German shepherd, 6 years old and built for endurance rather than show, stood near the edge of the clearing with his cream-gray-black coat lifting in the rising wind. His amber eyes fixed on the access road, not in fear, but in calculation. The black harness with the deep red trim shifted slightly across his shoulders as his muscles engaged. He did not bark immediately. He inhaled once, deeply drawing scent through the col Huan Sol like a compass seeking north. Rowan straightened from where he had been stacking firewood. The old olive tactical shirt stretched faintly across his back as he turned. The red thermal beneath held warmth against the chill, but the air was dropping fast. "What is it?" he asked quietly. The answer came not in sound, but in motion. Coda lunged toward the road with sudden purpose, a sharp bark breaking from his chest, urgent, directional, not reactive. Rowan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, clipped the leash to the harness, and stepped into the widening white. Visibility collapsed in seconds. Snow cut sideways across the clearing, stinging exposed skin. The world narrowed to a corridor of shifting gray. Rowan leaned into the wind, one hand on the harness handle, trusting the dog's pull more than his own sight. And they reached the bend in the road where drifts formed easily. Coda veered sharply into the ditch. Rowan followed and saw her. A human shape, half buried against the snowbank. Small, curled inward. The kind of stillness that carried risk. He dropped to one knee. She was young, early 20s at most, with dark hair plastered across her face, lashes rimmed with frost. Her coat sleeve was torn open, stuffing exposed like feathers. One glove was missing. Her fingers were pale with the faint gray-blue edge of cold injury. When Rowan touched her shoulder, her eyes flickered open, brown and glassy with shock. "You're not alone," he said, steady, low, close to her ear so the wind wouldn't steal the words. Coda pressed in immediately against her side, body blocking the worst of the gusts. Heat transferred instinctively. Rowan assessed pulse and breath in seconds. Weak, but present. No obvious trauma. He slid his arms beneath her and lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing. Too light for someone her age. As the walk back felt longer than it was, snow erased their tracks behind them, as if denying they had passed. Rowan moved on muscle memory alone. Coda ranged forward and back, adjusting direction, cutting through drifts without panic. Inside the cabin, the door slammed shut against the wind, and the storm became a distant roar. Rowan laid her on the couch near the stove and worked methodically. Boots off first. Socks peeled away carefully, blankets layered without haste. The cast-iron stove radiated steady heat, and he adjusted the draft to maintain slow warming. Rapid heat could shock her system. Discipline here mattered more than speed. Coda settled along her lower legs, curved protectively but not crowding. His breathing remained slow and even. The storm's sound was constant, predictable. Nothing like the concussive unpredictability of city noise that once triggered him. The girl's eyes opened again. "Storm," she whispered. "Outside," Rowan said. "You're inside." Her lips trembled. "Aaron," Rowan nodded. "Rowan, that's Coda." Her gaze shifted to the dog. Coda held it calmly. After a moment, her trembling hand brushed against his fur. Her shoulders lowered fractionally, as though something inside her had unclenched. Rowan handed her a mug of warm broth, once her hands could hold it. She drank in small sips, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "Bus stopped running," she said faintly. "Thought I could walk." From Duluth, she explained in broken phrases. Too far, too exposed. She must have misjudged distance or overestimated her strength. He didn't lecture. He didn't ask why yet. He simply monitored her breathing and watched for clarity to return to her eyes. Outside, the storm intensified, rattling the cabin walls. Snow struck the windows in horizontal bursts. Then something subtle shifted in the room. Coda lifted his head, not toward the door, not toward the wind, but toward Aaron, and he studied her face with unusual intensity, ears forward, posture still. Slowly, deliberately, he moved closer and rested his chin against her knee. Not guarding, not warning, anchoring. Aaron inhaled sharply, as if a memory had brushed against her skin. "I had one," she whispered, voice trembling for a different reason now. "German Shepherd. He didn't like loud things either." Rowan felt something align in that moment. Not fate, not destiny, but recognition. The way certain lives bend toward each other when something broken in one mirrors something healing in another. Coda remained there, unmoving, as if confirming a silent contract. Hours passed. The storm howled, then steadied into relentless snowfall. Aaron's body temperature stabilized gradually. Rowan helped her upstairs once she could stand, guiding her to the small guest room. Fresh blankets, dry clothes from spare supplies. No questions that required strength she did not yet have. When she sat on the edge of the bed, she hesitated before speaking again. Someone followed me," she said quietly. Rowan didn't interrupt. "A truck. I thought it was a ride. It kept slowing down. The words were simple, but they carried weight. He absorbed them without reaction. "You're safe tonight," he said, present tense, nothing beyond it. She studied him, the square jaw, clean-shaven face, gray-blue eyes that did not flinch or exaggerate. "Military?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded, as if that explained his tone. Downstairs the fire burned low and steady. Rowan returned to the main room and sat near the stove. Coda lay at the base of the stairs, half dozing but alert, ears flicking at each shift of wind. The storm masked everything beyond the clearing. It also concealed. Rowan replayed the details in his mind. The earlier boot prints, the SUV in town, Landry's measured tone, now a truck that had followed Aaron along an empty northern road. He did not jump to conclusions. But patterns demanded attention. Near midnight, so the wind softened slightly. Snow fell straight down instead of sideways. Rowan rose and checked the perimeter through the window. White layered over white. No headlights, no movement. Coda joined him at the door. The dog did not tremble, did not crouch, did not react to the wind the way he once had to urban shock waves. He stood steady. Rowan rested his hand on the thick fur at the base of Coda's neck. "You did good," he said quietly. The dog's tail moved once, slow and deliberate. Upstairs, Aaron's breathing evened into deep sleep. The cabin felt different now. Less like isolation. More like shelter. Rowan understood something then, not in grand revelation, but in quiet clarity. He had come north to give Coda space from noise. Instead, the forest had given them something else. Responsibility. He added one more log to the fire and sat back down, listening to the storm ease its grip on the trees. Outside, the whiteout erased tracks and boundaries alike. Inside, warmth held. And for tonight, that was enough. Morning after the storm arrived with deceptive gentleness. Sunlight spilled across the clearing in pale gold, transforming the violence of the night into something almost serene. Snow lay smooth and undisturbed, sculpted into soft ridges by wind now gone quiet. The forest stood luminous, each pine branch heavy with white, every sound muted beneath thick winter cover. Rowan stepped outside just after dawn, boots pressing into fresh snow with a soft, deliberate crunch. The cold air bit at his face, clean and sharp. Behind him, the cabin door closed with a quiet thud. Coda followed close at heel, his breath rising in steady white plumes, amber eyes scanning the clearing with controlled attention. Aaron was still asleep upstairs. Rowan had checked her temperature before coming out, normal, steady. And the faint color in her cheeks had returned overnight. Her breathing had been even, deeper than the fragile rhythm of the evening before. That steadiness had allowed Rowan to rest lightly for a few hours, though true sleep had not come easily. He paused near the edge of the clearing. The storm had erased nearly everything. Nearly. Coda stopped first. His posture changed. Not rigid, not alarmed, but focused. He angled toward the access road and lowered his head slightly, inhaling with slow precision. Rowan followed his line of sight. There. Fresh tracks. Not from the night before, not covered by storm. These were made after the snow had settled. Boot prints, deep, evenly spaced, approaching from the direction of the main road. They stopped just beyond the tree line where the clearing opened. They did not enter fully. They lingered at the edge half, concealed by shadow. Rowan crouched to examine them. The tread was familiar in its weight and structure, heavy winter tactical boots again. Not random hikers. Not local kids wandering. Someone had stood there this morning, watching. Koda's ears twitched once, then steadied. He did not tremble. He did not lower himself in fear. He simply observed. Rowan straightened slowly, jaw tightening slightly. He scanned the surrounding woods carefully, tree to tree, ridge to ridge. No movement. No sound beyond distant snow shifting from branches warming in sunlight. He did not follow the tracks. Not yet. Instead, he memorized their angle and spacing. He returned to the cabin with controlled steps. Inside, the stove still held faint warmth. Erin sat at the small kitchen table, wrapped in one of Rowan's spare flannel shirts over borrowed thermal leggings. Her dark hair, now brushed and tied loosely at the nape of her neck, framed a face that looked younger in daylight. There were freckles across her nose he hadn't noticed the night before. Her build was slight, but not frail, more undernourished than inherently small. On her brown eyes carried exhaustion layered over something harder wariness sharpened by experience. She looked up when he entered. "You went outside," she said softly. "Yes." She read his expression quickly. "Someone was here," she guessed. Rowan didn't lie. "Yes." Her shoulders stiffened slightly. "I told you," she whispered. He nodded once. "Tracks. This morning." Erin swallowed. Her fingers tightened briefly around the mug she held. "They don't usually get that close," she said. Rowan's eyes sharpened. "They?" Erin hesitated. Her gaze drifted toward the window, then back to him. "I don't know who they are. Just the truck. It slowed. It kept pace. I got off the road, thought they'd pass. They didn't." Her voice remained controlled, but Rowan could see the faint tremor in her knuckles. Koda moved closer and settled near her chair, his body angled toward the door without tension. His presence seemed to steady her breathing. Rowan leaned against the counter, some posture relaxed but alert. "We'll handle it." Erin studied him carefully. "You're not surprised." "I've seen patterns before," he replied evenly. She nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she had suspected about him. Outside, the snow reflected light so intensely it almost glowed. The clearing looked peaceful, almost untouched. Almost. Mid-morning, Koda did something Rowan had not seen before. Without prompting, the dog moved to the base of the stairs and began pacing in a small, tight circle, controlled but deliberate. His nose lifted, catching scent from the upper floor. Then he stopped abruptly and turned toward Rowan, holding his gaze with an intensity that felt purposeful. Rowan followed him upstairs. Erin's backpack lay near the bed where Rowan had placed it the night before. Koda moved directly to it and nudged it once with his nose. Rowan crouched and unzipped it carefully. Inside were basic essentials clothes, a notebook swollen slightly from moisture, a folded photograph, and beneath them something heavier wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it slowly. A small external hard drive. Unmarked. Koda sat back, watching Rowan's face. Erin appeared in the doorway, tension flickering across her features. "I didn't tell you," she said quietly. Rowan met her gaze. "Tell me now." She stepped fully into the room, shoulders squared despite the faint tremor beneath. "I worked at a logistics firm," she said, "contracted through a county vendor. They handled land data transfers, digitizing old property maps." Rowan felt the pieces shift internally. Files started disappearing, she continued. Boundaries changing, parcels moving on paper. June's words from days earlier surfaced in his mind. Someone rewriting geography. I copied some of it, Aaron said, glancing at the hard drive. Just in case. The weight of it settled heavily into the quiet room. Coda remained still, gaze moving between them, whilst Rowan closed the cloth around the drive carefully. Does anyone know you took it? Aaron hesitated. I think so. Silence deepened. Outside, snow fell gently from branches in soft thuds. Rowan moved downstairs with measured steps. He placed the drive on the table without connecting it yet. He did not rush to plug it into his laptop. Impulse served no one here. Aaron stood near the doorway, arms crossed lightly against herself. You should have left me, she said quietly. Rowan looked at her steadily. No. Her chin lifted slightly, not defiance, but disbelief. They won't stop, she murmured. Rowan stepped toward the window and looked out at the clearing. They don't have to, he said evenly, but they won't dictate. Coda moved to the door and stood there calmly, tail relaxed. There was no tremor in him, no sign of the dog who once folded inward at sharp sound. He seemed larger somehow in the quiet, cabin-grounded present. Rowan turned back to Aaron. We'll do this deliberately. There's no sudden moves. Her eyes searched his face for cracks, panic, hesitation, doubt. She found none. You're not scared? She asked. I am, he replied simply. I just don't let it move me first. That seemed to settle something inside her. By early afternoon, Rowan stepped outside again to re-examine the tracks. They had not advanced closer to the cabin. No new impressions had appeared. Whoever had stood there had chosen distance, observation over confrontation. That Rowan understood intimately. He marked the coordinates mentally and returned inside. The fire burned steadily. Aaron sat with Coda at her feet, one hand resting lightly against his back. The dog's eyes were half closed, but alert to every subtle shift. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a hinge. Rowan picked up the hard drive again, feeling its weight in his palm. Not heavy, but consequential. He met Aaron's gaze. We'll look at it tonight, he said. After dark. She nodded. The forest outside stood quiet and watchful, and inside the cabin, beneath the warmth of the stove and the steady presence of a German shepherd who had chosen his role without fear, the lines in the snow had begun to form something clearer. Not chaos, direction. For now, they would not run. They would prepare. And that decision settled into the room like a second fire-steady, contained, controlled. Night settled over the clearing with a clarity that felt earned. The storm had moved east, leaving the forest rinsed clean and unnervingly bright beneath a sky crowded with stars. Snow reflected moonlight in pale blue sheets, and the cabin stood at the center of it all like a deliberate mark on untouched paper. Rowan waited until the fire burned steady and the windows were dark mirrors before he placed the external hard drive on the table and connected it to his laptop. He did not rush the process. He watched the boot sequence, listened to the faint hum of electronics, and let the room settle around him. Aaron sat opposite him, posture straighter now, strength returning in subtle ways. In lamplight, the freckles across her nose stood out against skin still pale from exposure. Her dark hair fell loosely over one shoulder, and though fatigue lingered beneath her eyes, the tremor in her hands had diminished. She folded her fingers together on the table, as if bracing against impact. Coda lay beside Rowan's chair, chin resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded, but attentive to every shift in breath. The drive mounted without issue. Folders appeared on the screen: dates, parcel numbers, revisions labeled as administrative updates. Rowan opened the first cluster methodically. Digital overlays revealed boundary lines that did not align with historical records. Sections of forest had been shifted by fractions at first, then by acres. Property designations changed from protected to transferable. Contracts routed through shell vendors with layered signatures. It was subtle, procedural theft disguised as correction. Aaron's voice remained low. They'd scan old paper maps and adjust them for accuracy. But the corrections always favored the same development group. Rowan cross-referenced the names quickly, and he recognized one from June's earlier comments, a private land consortium seeking expansion rights along the Eastern Ridge, He felt the connection land quietly in his chest. "These aren't errors," he said. "No," Aaron replied. "They're erasures." The wind outside had softened into a whisper, brushing snow from branches in occasional soft falls. Inside, the cabin held steady warmth. Rowan continued scrolling. Each file deepened the pattern incremental changes stacking into something significant. A communications facility once marked Federal Reserve land now appeared partially designated as private easement. He leaned back slightly. "This isn't just local," he said. "It's coordinated." Aaron nodded. "That's why I copied it." Rowan studied her. There was no bravado in her expression, only exhaustion layered over determination. Whatever fear she carried had not erased her sense of right. Coda lifted his head slightly at a faint sound wood contracting in the cooling air. His ears flicked once, then relaxed. He did not rise. He did not brace. The difference struck Rowan unexpectedly. There had been a time when a sudden pop from the stove would have sent the dog retreating under furniture, breath short and frantic. Now he simply listened and recalibrated. Progress did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it revealed itself in stillness. Rowan returned to the files. A series of email attachments appeared in a subfolder Aaron had labeled Archive. He opened one. It was a scanned memo referencing facilitated adjustment of Eastern Tract for long-term redevelopment planning. The signature at the bottom was a name he recognized instantly. Landry Shaw, Deputy, County-level authority, the measured smile, the polite warnings, the suggestion that new tenants understand boundaries. Rowan felt no spike of adrenaline, only confirmation. Aaron saw his expression change. "You know that name," she said. Yes." He closed the laptop carefully, not with fear, but with deliberation. "We don't act yet," he said. Aaron's shoulders tightened. "They already know I have it." "They suspect," Rowan corrected gently. "Suspicion isn't proof." Outside, a distant branch snapped, natural, unhurried. Coda rose then, not in alarm, but in response to Rowan standing. He moved toward the door and paused, waiting. Rowan clipped on the leash and stepped outside into the moonlit clearing. The night air was sharp, carrying the metallic scent of snow and pine sap. The forest felt less like an enclosure now, and more like a witness. Rowan walked slowly to the edge of the clearing where the fresh tracks from earlier had lingered before wind softened them. The prints were faint now, edges rounded. He stood in that spot and looked outward into the trees. Someone had stood here and watched. But they had not crossed the line into the clearing. They had chosen distance, perhaps caution, perhaps calculation, and Rowan understood that instinct intimately. Reconnaissance before engagement, study before movement. Koda's body language mirrored his own steady, grounded, alert without tension. The dog inhaled once, nostrils flaring slightly, then exhaled and relaxed. Rowan felt something shift internally. The forest no longer felt like isolation. It felt like ground held. He turned back toward the cabin. Halfway to the porch, Koda stopped abruptly, not rigid, not defensive, but deeply attentive. His ears angled toward the eastern ridge, body angled slightly forward. Rowan followed his line of sight and saw it. Just for a second, a faint reflection of moonlight off something metallic far beyond the trees. It vanished almost immediately, swallowed by shadow. Koda did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply held position, eyes fixed, waiting. Rowan felt the old instinct stir, not to charge, not to chase, but to mark. He memorized the angle of the ridge, and the depth between trees, the way light had caught and disappeared. Then Koda's posture softened, and he turned back toward the cabin of his own accord. The message was clear. Not tonight. Inside, Erin watched them return. "Anything?" she asked. "Distance," Rowan replied. She absorbed that quietly. He reopened the laptop and continued scanning files. There were financial ledgers referencing projected land value increases once the reclassification process finalized. Millions in speculative gain. Enough motive to silence inconvenient evidence. Erin's fingers tightened again. "They won't stop," she whispered. Rowan met her gaze. "They don't need to," he said evenly. "They've already exposed themselves." It was not bravado. It was strategy. Corruption thrived in darkness. The files represented leverage. Exposure would not be immediate. It would be layered, deliberate. Koda circled once near the stove and lay down again. Stretching fully onto his side, an unguarded posture Rowan had not seen in crowded environments for months. The dog's breathing slowed into steady rhythm, tail resting loosely against the floor. Rowan watched him for a moment. "You're not afraid," he murmured softly. Koda's ears flicked, but he did not rise. Rowan realized then that the cabin had done more than offer quiet. It had offered context. Noise had once been unpredictable and overwhelming. Here, sound carried pattern. Here, threat announced itself in subtle shifts rather than sudden chaos. Koda's recovery was not accidental. It was environmental recalibration. Erin followed his gaze. "He trusts this place," she said. Rowan nodded slowly. "So do I." The admission surprised him. Trust was not something he gave easily, not to institutions, not to officials, not to systems that shifted boundaries in silence. But the clearing, the ridge, the cabin, they had not lied. They had revealed exactly what they were. He closed the laptop finally and removed the hard drive, wrapping it again in cloth. "We'll make copies tomorrow," he said. "Encrypted, stored in separate locations." Erin's posture straightened slightly at the practicality of it. "You're staying," she said. "Yes." It was not defiance. It was decision. The forest outside held its quiet vigil. Moonlight traced the edges of trees and ridgelines like careful ink. No headlights pierced the dark. No engines echoed through snow. Rowan banked the fire lower and stood for a final look through the window. The clearing lay open and unhidden. Whatever line had been crossed by those shifting maps and erased parcels had now extended here. But Rowan did not feel hunted. He felt positioned. Coda rose and stood beside him, shoulder brushing his leg lightly. Rowan rested his hand against the dog's neck, feeling steady warmth beneath fur. "We don't run," he said quietly. The words were not about pride. They were about alignment. Upstairs, Aaron moved softly, settling into sleep. The hard drive lay secured in Rowan's pack. The ridge beyond the trees held its secrets for another night. The wind passed. The cabin remained. And what stood within it no longer felt fragile. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or blazing light. They come quietly, wrapped in snow, hidden in ordinary decisions, carried on the steady breath of a loyal dog and the courage of a wounded heart. What saved that cabin was not strength alone, and not strategy alone. It was obedience to something deeper. The quiet conviction to stand where you are placed and do what is right, even when fear whispers otherwise. God does not always remove the storm. Sometimes he sends someone into it. Sometimes he uses broken places, broken pasts, and even frightened hearts to build shelter for others. Rowan came north because his dog could not endure noise. He stayed because he realized silence was not emptiness. It was preparation. And in that preparation, God aligned paths that seemed accidental but were never random. In daily life, and we often search for dramatic signs, for unmistakable proof that we are being guided. But more often, God works through small obediences, choosing not to run, choosing to protect, choosing to tell the truth when it would be easier to look away. The miracle is not that danger disappears. The miracle is that courage rises anyway. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who may be walking through their own storm. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what part of this journey touched your heart. And if you believe that stories of quiet faith, resilience, and purpose still matter, subscribe to this channel so we can continue walking these paths together. May God bless you and your family. May He steady your steps when the wind rises. May He send you the right companions at the right moment. And may you discover that even in the quietest places, you are never standing alone.